Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Beyond Decolonisation Roundtable today. This is the first crochet event in person since the pandemic, so it's been an interesting experience trying to remember how to do this like with actual human beings instead of little blocks on Zoom. So yeah, we really appreciate everyone joining us today, both online and in person. For those joining us on the live stream, please pop your comments and questions in the comment section, and we'll try and take some of those during the Q&A. For those who have so kindly joined us in person, there will be some refreshments afterwards, so you can look forward to that. The bathrooms are down the passage, off the landing, through the passage, over that side. Yeah, and please just keep the COVID restrictions in mind about social distance and mask wearing. And yeah, thank you again for joining us. And then my first job of today is to just introduce Prof. Kiet, very briefly. He is the Chair for Critical Studies in Higher Education Transformation and the DVC Engagement and Transformation. And I'd just like to call him up to do the welcome. Thanks, Prof.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, friends from all over. I'm not going to share with you what my good friend Tsepo said about my shoes and my dress code here. That apparently hasn't shifted since the advent of COVID. So I'm taking it just like that. So a very warm welcome to Nelson Mandela University, to this particular roundtable, and of course apologies for the small hiccups. This has to do with how COVID has de-skilled us when it comes to, in-person events and so on, but things will get better as we move ahead. So we are honored to have Tsepo Matlingozi, Mtunzikazi Mbungwana, and Omalanga Mkize to provoke a conversation about the contestations, contradictions, tensions, paradoxes, fractures, and cul-de-sacs of the decolonization discourse as it has emerged since the 2015-2016 must-fall movement that, of course, reverberated across the globe. This roundtable is part of the Redirections, Ukuchinchwa Kwentlela, Knowledge Praxis, and the African Purpose Curriculum Seminar Series that has been an ongoing feature of the Research Chair programmatic work since 2018. We're very, very happy to now at least get it going again in this hybrid format this moment in time. This series is a response to the key priorities of de- and redisciplining knowledge and the transformation of practices, curriculum, and pedagogy that better reflect our African social reality. Through cultivating various modalities of dialogues, such as this roundtable, we hope to subject our ways of knowing to productive critique for innovative practices to emerge. Today, the subject of this critique is the decolonization discourse that has generated massive traction and energy in the higher education sector over the past 7 years, not only in South Africa, but also globally. This energy has generated a multitude of productive scholarly reflections, praxis, publications, seminars, and discussions on not only the decolonization of higher education as institution, but also the transformation of the curriculum. At the same time, it has sometimes generated circular modes of argument and not often led to substantive material change in the sector or our broader society. Our university is in the process of establishing an Africanization decolonization working group to grapple with these challenges. It sees the questions of Africanization and decolonization as intertwined and in tension. In both cases, these are gaps that we need to address. Firstly, there is the fact that African intellectual traditions and the development of Africa purpose knowledge orientations and learning experiences are not featuring strongly enough in higher education transformation debates in South Africa. Secondly, it is apparent that there is a lack of substantive reflections on what decolonization and the transformation of the curriculum may mean across various knowledge fields and how the university itself would proceed with the decolonization project as an institution. The question of the indigenous should also be a key theme for our discussion on Africanization and decolonization. So this roundtable is a timeless conversation, and we look forward to where its ideas may lead us in thinking through how to further the university's decolonization project for ourselves, but also how we can contribute further into the higher education discourse in innovative and productive ways. Once again, a warm welcome to Tsepo, to Mtunzikazi, and to Nomalanga, and to all of you who are attending today, both in person and online. Thank you very much for taking the time to engage with us and for attending. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. So the program says Apiwe Bazani will be doing the welcome, but he is trying to get some of our students from the other campuses to the event, so I'm just standing in for him today. So firstly, thank you so much to our speakers for agreeing to be here today. I'm just going to do a short introduction for each of them. I'm starting with Prof. Tsepo Madlingozi. He's an associate professor and a director of the Center for Applied Legal Studies at the University of Witwatersrand. He has master's degrees in both law and sociology, and he received his PhD degree from Birkbeck, University of London. He is a research associate at the Chair for Critical Studies in Higher Education and Transformation at Nelson Mandela University. He is the co-editor of the South African Journal of Human Rights and co-editor of Symbol or Substance, Socioeconomic Rights in South Africa, and a co-editor of Introduction to Law and Legal Skills in South Africa. He sits on the boards of the following civil society organizations: the Rural Democracy Trust and the Mining Affected Communities United in Action, Women Affected by Mining Action. He's also a member of the steering committee of the African Coalition for Corporate Accountability and a member of the advisory board of Health Justice Initiative. For 13 years, he has worked with and for Kulumani Support Group, a 120,000 strong social movement of victims and survivors of apartheid, as National Advocacy Coordinator and later the chairperson. Then Prof. Nomalanga Mkhize is a historian based at the Nelson Mandela University in Gqeberha. She is the acting director for the School of Governmental and Social Sciences. Her research interests are in African language historical literatures, vernacular historiography, and 19th century Eastern Cape history. Her current research interest is in Eastern Cape historiography, and she takes a particular interest in the historiography of 19th century Xhosa writers. Her academic career spans more than a decade. Whilst pursuing this, she has also participated in education activism and other civil society initiatives in the Eastern Cape. She is a strong advocate for early mother tongue reading and has collaborated in developing books and materials in African languages for children. She has an MA in history from Rhodes University and a PhD in sociology from the University of Cape Town. And finally, Mtunzikazi Mbungwana is a poet and part-time teacher in the creative writing course at Rhodes University, where she completed a master's in creative writing in isiXhosa. Her writing focuses on themes of home, dreams, and everyday black queer life to reflect the times that we live in. She has published 2 isiXhosa poetry collections, Umnikelo in 2015 and Unamwena in 2021. She is one part of the 6-member team of isiXhosa language scholars, practitioners, and writers that are currently translating Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonizing the Mind into isiXhosa. Mtunzikazi is a founder of Usiba Writers Collective, an online group of isiXhosa writers committed in growing the language. And on that note, can I ask Mtunzikazi to read her opening poem or present? Thank you.
Thank you, thanks, John. Molwen. This poem is titled Umamise Utoki. Kwizinja zonke zalelali kukho le ngumamise. Umamise lintshontsho lembewu yezinja zalomzi. Umamise yimbewu katoki. Utoki inkunzi yenja yalapha ekhaya. Utoki wamihlisa zonke injakazi zenginqi. Utoki uhloma ashiye agqithele kumhlaba ochumileyo. Unehlokondiba lamantshontsho agcwele yonke lelali. Utoki wabaxhapha onke amaqanda enkukhu zalapho. Wabuya enomgada elalini. Imbongi ezichongele isizwe zambonga uToki zimncoma ukukhalipha. Umamise wabizwa njengenjakazi emabele made ukondla amantshontsho kaToki. uToki ngugcina umzi, umlondolozi, ugcina usapho. Umamise lintshontsho kaToki. uToki ulala evundwini, umamise phandle yinja, umamise injakazi ekhusele yonke le mibundlwana yashiywa nguToki iqothole. uToki liqhawe eliqhwalelayo, kwakulahleka amaqanda, kwakulahleka amathambo esopholo, lityala likamamise, uToki yinja. Enkosi.
Thanks so much, Mthunzikazi. I'll just hand over to Prof. Kiet now to facilitate the provocations and discussion.
Once again, Jenny. Ponzo, you ready? Right, Tsepo, we'll start with you, and of course, you can decide whether you would like to stand over there and whether you would like to sit. There is a microphone there next to you, Tsepo, so over to you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It's good to be back home here at Nelson Mandela University. It's home. We've been told that we've got 10 minutes, so our comments will be very telegraph. Is it telegraph or telegram? Telegram, truncated. So 3 years ago, I was in this venue presenting on decolonization. My thesis then, which is still my thesis today, was that decolonization is a disruptive phenomenon. That was 3 years ago. What I meant by that was that decolonization must mean that it's not business as usual at 2 levels. Firstly, at the university and society level. If we are serious about decolonization, it must be disruptive, both to the functioning of the university and the society. Because, of course, there can't be decolonization of society without decolonization of the university. There can't be decolonization of the university without also decolonizing society. It must be disruptive. Not this thing that we have now, where decolonization is management speak. It's public relations. It's ways of reaffirming the Eurocentric university by spicing it up with decolonial language. It must be disruptive. But most importantly, what I meant by that was that decolonization must be disruptive at an individual level. That is to mean that if we are serious about decolonization, if we are to go beyond coloniality, colonization, we need to go through a painful inner voyage, very, very painful inner voyage. There is no decolonization without this very painful inner voyage into the soul. That inner voyage is important to not only overcome internalized homophobia, racism, sexism, classism, ableism, and double consciousness, but this inner voyage is also important to overcome what in my work I call racial melancholia. Racial melancholia. Now, of course, melancholia, I take it from this white European man called Sigmund Freud, the psychologist, Sigmund Freud. Now, he makes a distinction between mourning and melancholia. The difference between mourning and melancholia is that people who are in melancholia, they go through unending grief because they don't know what they've lost in themselves. And therefore, they remain conscripted. They remain trapped in the orbit of their abuser or the trauma. The reason why we need to go beyond decolonization is because you can see this racial melancholia in our discourse on decoloniality, on decolonization. We remain trapped within the orbit of the colonizer, of Eurocentrism, of coloniality. And you see that in two ways. You see this conscription in the orbit of the colonizer in two ways. First of all, you see it in discourses, praxis, writings that pretend to be talking against the white man, talking against the colonizer. But what actually is happening is that people want acknowledgement from the white man. They want the white man to say, I'm sorry. So they pretend to be shouting at the white man when in actual fact they are trapped in the need for acknowledgement, for shaming the colonizer, for the colonizer to say, I acknowledge you and I'm sorry. That's not decolonization. That's not decolonization. This pretends to be shouting against. It's actually a trap to say to the colonizer, please acknowledge me. I'm going to shame you by speaking against you. The second way you see this conscription, this in the colonizer orbit, is in the so-called discourse of decolonization, which actually falls into the trap of colonization. It actually falls into the trap of colonization. So number one, people talk about the need to retrieve native discourse. We need to retrieve native discourse. I mean, that can be our emancipatory horizon. The colonizer, I mean, the native only comes into being when the settler arrives, right? We all know that, right? The native only comes into being when the settler arrives. So you can't say your emancipatory horizon of decoloniality is to retrieve native discourse. That doesn't make sense. But also we know what we mean by native discourse is what is created in the colonial library, in anthropology, in missionary discourse, and so forth. That's what we mean by native discourse. So you are falling into the trap set by the colonialist. The second way you see this is when people talk about the need to delink. Okay, I'll mention that later. But the second way you see that is when people talk about black discourse and white discourse. That we need to retrieve our black discourse, our black culture. Well, whiteness and blackness is created by the colonizer. So for you to say your decoloniality, your emancipatory horizon is to retrieve black culture, is to fall into the trap set by the white racists who first created these dichotomies of whiteness and blackness, black culture and white culture. But lastly, you see this conscription in the orbit of the colonizer in this notion of delinking. Delinking. We need to delink from white epistemology. We need to delink from Western epistemology. Is it ever possible to delink? And when we talk about delinking, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? Delinking. So in my work, I proposed to move beyond this cul-de-sac in two ways. And it's not original, in two ways. First of all, it is to look towards Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And in his work, I pick up four books of his that I conceive into a tetralogy, fourness, his four books, where he proposes a way to go beyond decoloniality, a way to go beyond these trappings that I've been talking about. The first one, of course, is decolonizing the mind. The second one, of course, is moving the center. So you decolonize your mind. There's no decolonization without decolonizing your mind. Otherwise, you will create new colonialism, as we see in South Africa where you pretend you are decolonizing, but you've not decolonized your mind. The second one, moving the center, meaning provincializing Europe, moving Europe and Eurocentrism out of the center of your life. And then the third one, remembering Africa. Going beyond decolonization must mean remembering Africa. And here remembering means both remembering and remembering. I hope you can hear the difference. I hope one told the difference between the two. Remembering and remembering us from the dismemberment of colonization. And the third one, very interesting, globalectics. Globalectics, meaning after you've remembered yourself, then you can engage with the world with Africa at your center. It is not a move to delink. You still want to be in the world, but with Africa at the center. Not this notion that we delink. I mean, that doesn't make sense. The second way where, in my work, where I look at going beyond decolonization is to look at A.C. Jordan's book that we all know. You know the book, right? That's right. The Ongoing Wrath of Ancestors. I'm not going to say it in the original, please. The book tells us that the ongoing wrath of the ancestors is the refusal to embrace both the Western so-called modern influence and our African influence. That's the ongoing wrath of the ancestors. That's the ongoing cause of our disease, or disease, if you want to call it that. So the way to go beyond decolonization is not to delink. It's not to claim for a retrieval of native discourse or to valorize black culture. It is an embrace of a creolizing identity. Creolizing. Meaning that we embrace both the Western influence. Of course, that is not dehumanizing, that is not homophobic, that is not ableist, that is not racist, that is not neoliberal. And our African identity. There is no way of going beyond decolonization unless we remember who we are, and who we are. I am because you are, since you are, therefore I am. That is a call for interculturality. That is a call for creolization. And for me, that's the way to go beyond decolonization, beyond making the white man the center of your life. It's a way of going beyond critique. We can't critique forever, comrades. We have to go beyond critique. What comes after critique? What comes after critique is the embrace of the creolizing identity. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tsepo. Noma?
Thank you so much to Butsepo. Let me just put on this watch so I can see the time. Thank you for that. So I'll try and, I agree with him 99%. There's a 1% where I don't agree, but I don't know if how can it be fun otherwise? Let me start with the example of creolization, but that is African, in Utoki that Umthunzi read. Utoki is a very interesting poem about Inja, and you can already feel by Inja and the many meanings of that in an African language. Inja, yendoda, Inja. And Utoki is a critique, I know this from talking to Umthunzi, of a poem by Umqai called Umbambush. Umbambush, oh, you're going to talk about that, but you know it's my favorite topic, so sorry to steal your thunder. Because I want us to talk about here the importance of being deeply rooted in Africanism in order to critique Africanism. That is what Utoki is an example of. So I'll leave it for Mthunzekazi and our coming paper on that topic. By the way, in the critique of Umqhayi, that poem itself is radical, Umbambush. But there are reasons why it has to be critiqued. So let me leave that for Mthunzekazi. But that, for me, is the beginning of talking about going beyond decolonization, that if you really want to talk about moving the center and getting away from the gaze of the white man, then you have to be rooted sufficiently enough in Africanism to speak back to the problematics of Africanism. So with that in mind, I want to then ask a question based on a thing you said, Uputsep, which is, if decolonization was meant to be disruptive, then why was it so quickly pacified? And my answer is because it was intended to be pacified. It is intentionally and encoded in it. Now, I just want to separate two things. The discourse which emerged versus the sentiment of students. The sentiment of students was disruptive, incredibly disruptive. In fact, the higher education sector has not recovered, so they must own that. In good ways and bad ways, now that they are lecturers, hasn't recovered. But the discourse which emerged itself was deeply steeped, I argue, in a very Eurocentric form of education, which is very characteristic of South African obsessions around what we say to white people. In history, we have this thing, as Thomas will know that, the back called pseudo-history. Thomas is a history student. Something called pseudo-history. Pseudo-history is that thing which, a history which appears believable, appears plausible, sounds credible, could be real, but is entirely false and fabricated. And key there for me is the word fabricated, and it often disregards evidence. A good example of a pseudo-history would be, let me pick a neutral one, would be the concept that there was a civilization on planet Earth 30,000 years ago, and just that archaeologists don't want to talk about it. There was no civilization of a higher order 30,000 years ago. If there was, we'd see all their litter everywhere, literally. We'd see all their rubbish. We can tell who's been here on the planet. In fact, related to that, let me bring it back home. Another example of a growing pseudo-history is this idea that all the stone remnants being found in Mpumalanga are something like 200,000 years old. No, they are not, because scientifically we were just emerging as Homo sapiens. They can't be. 200,000 years ago was just the beginning of Untu, okay? So the stones we know are likely about between 1,000 and 800 years old, given the fact that we know the civilizations of Southern Africa that have lived in that Shona complex, right? We know it, it's not complicated. Our ancestors built with stone. Don't make a fuss about it. Don't say it's 200,000 years old. So with that in mind, I would argue, in fact, that in the decolonization debate, the subset that is called decoloniality is a form of pseudo-theory. It sounds credible, it should be credible, but it offers nothing and is vacuous and empty of its own content, and as a result has to borrow. And in fact it's tautological if I talk from philosophers, it starts here, but then it starts from the point at which it refers to itself, and then it validates itself on the point of its own reference. It's secular logic. Let me argue as to why decoloniality in particular is a pseudo-theory. Something that seems to tell you something, but is vacuous of real content. The first is that it identifies a problem called coloniality. Now, if you talk to any black person, we can tell you something is colonial because we are the subject and objects of that thing. So to us, it's not that hard to say, "Ay man, isilungu lento," say, "Bona man, it's colonial." we can tell, right? But it identifies coloniality in ways which appear specific in some respects, but in others is all-encompassing. So anything and everything, modernity, right? It's all colonial, actually. So in identifying the full extent of capitalist, heterosexual, patriarchal, yonke ngoku colonial, the patriarchy, the everything. And so anything and everything which we live with is then can be identified and accused of coloniality. So nothing in the modern world can escape that potential accusation. So if anything and everything can be colonial, then anything and everything ought to be decolonially deconstructed. Because anything and everything in this modern world, really, the heterosexist, patriarchal, and all the whatever nonsenses that humanities people like, all those things are now a baggage. And so decoloniality becomes a contrarian, pervasive position that you can take on anything. On anything. You sitting here in this room, you're not sitting in a circle, it's not decolonial. So, if coloniality is ever present, ever pervasive, then anything from the food we eat, the way we sit, the things we do, the whatever we do is colonial itself. The residual of colonialism can never be escaped. And so in that light, and I think I'm really trying to align myself with much of what Butsepo has said, therefore, if all residual coloniality lives with us, then how do we begin to extricate anything decolonial from it? How do we do that? I would argue that what decoloniality has done, and I'm talking here from the biggest theorists, Mignolo to whoever, I don't read a lot of them because they send me in circles. What they've done, in fact, is they've repackaged old ideas, appropriated concepts that come from all traditions of Black and African and indigenous life, and repackaged these things in new language, about praxis, about nexus. There has to be an X in it, about intersectional, whatever it is that they want. They repackage these ideas in ways which appear to be a new revelation of Black life, but are not, and that's why it's a pseudo-theory. So decoloniality thus not only identifies pervasive coloniality, it has no tools of its own that are identifiable, except that which it has already appropriated from the existing traditions of radical Black thought and Africanism. That is why I would argue in this confluence of attempts to position an assemblage of old ideas into more abstracted concepts that are now called decoloniality, we find that it's difficult to define what exactly it is it must then decolonize, which is why your universities have not decolonized. Because you never identified anything in particular, because you can't in the scheme of this theory. Now, since decoloniality then captures anything from the Black experience and everything from the modern experience to counterposition anything against each other, it means, as Utsepo has argued, that you can never therefore get out of the gaze. You can't get out of the colonial gaze. You must situate yourself right square in the full gaze of whiteness to act decolonially. Because you have to tell it that it's colonial for you to be decolonial or for the thing to be decolonial. I'm almost there. I'm literally looking at the clock. And so it is a contrarian position, which I then argue is in fact a Black postmodern reaction to perpetual postmodernity, especially in the university. It is a contrarian position. It's a position of argument, not a position of action. Unlike Marxism, actually, which is actually provides you in the humanities with some conception of, okay, what do we do now? Unlike Pan-Africanism, which can say, what can we do now, right? Not to say that all theory must say, what can we do now? But in terms of what it promises and what it delivers nothing. And so decoloniality is a Blackness that is perpetually holding whiteness in its gaze. It is in fact a begging of the white liberal to love you more. Because to disappear from the gaze of the white liberal is for you to feel insignificant, since the significance is only derived when white people praise you or look at you or argue with you, but not when Nomalanga argues with you. So let me then end by saying this. I have a grievance, since it seems in my job in administration is to deal with grievances. Here's my grievance. In this country, in the university system, largely, two things have happened. One, decoloniality has created boys' clubs. Boys' clubs, you cannot even talk to a Black male student without them trying to force you to take this decolonial nonsense seriously, because it's really an affirmation of a kind of seeking for theory within a young black male search, okay? I don't want to go into a feminist critique of that because I think it's valid. I think it's valid that young black men are seeking. The second thing is, so one cannot engage with it if I try to engage, because there is a very strong element of that. I accept it, but it just means we've lost a bunch of young black men to a theory that doesn't send them anywhere. Secondly, it tends to pretend that it embraces Africanism when it actually hates it. I can't decoloniality. Because if we were to talk about Uplanti, we might have to take men seriously, and that's too much for a decolonial view that's also trying to critique the Western patriarchy. So how are you going to begin to get into Africanism, which is necessary in terms of African philosophies and our linkages to the rest of the world, if you've already intrinsically decided that certain African things are lost? Which is why I circle back to Utoki. To critique the colonial world is to decide to move away from it, and it's to be rooted sufficiently in Africanism that not only can you create deeply and richly anti-patriarchal Africanism, anti-homophobic Africanism, while still being able to not need the white theory to tell you what to do about it. So I will stop there.
Thanks very much, Noma. Tunzikazi?
Okay, so what does decolonization mean to me in a practical way as a poet and a creative writer and a teacher? So my work traces the root of silence I was raised in, to remove the dwarfing loads of myths of belonging off my shoulders, to untie my tongue of the imposed shame of speaking about pleasure and choosing freely who I want to share these pockets of joy with. Many of us grew up under the influences of Methodist Church. That is why a lot of people, when they read the title of my latest book, Unamuwena, that emanates from my 2019 master's thesis, will be reminded of a Bible verse, Indumiso, Zika Davide, Psalms chapter 23, verse 4. Ethi nokuba ndihamba emfuleni wethunzi lokufa, andikho ikabubi ngokuba unam wena. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. The title and contents of this book has nothing to do with uDavide, endingamaziyo isiduko sakhe, nor the Psalms or the Bible. But during the process of my writing, and later writing my thesis and later converting it to this book, I was forced to question all that I knew and choose anew who I wanted to be in the world and be at peace with that. My poems had to reflect the times I live in, to stretch the language, and most importantly, live and not just be beautiful decorating devices. Kwakumele imibongo yam ingabizo ngqayi nje zokuhombisa nokuqhayisa, but be vases and calabashes that we use to drink water, or umqombothi if you like. I believe that a poet writes to scratch an itch or dance to the drum playing in their head. To me, poetry is a mirror I use to interact with my shadow or reflect the space I exist in. My father was a senior preacher at Methodist Church, and the first spoken word artist I encountered. Yena nabantu babesithi ngumshumayeli, mna ndithi was a spoken word artist. To my father, the pulpit was a stage, a place to display his melodramatic stance and, in a great degree, his emotions. In my opinion, it was easier for my father to express himself at church because there were readily available words in hymns and the Bible that gave him a language. At home, my father said only what needed to be said. For him, life in the outside was unmethodical because he had to discipline his children, address conflict, attend traditional ceremonies elalini, apay lift abantu abayedolophini. All those mundane everydayness things were very emotional, taxing to him. Therefore, he chose silence. It is this silence okuhlala phezu kwamanzi that I'm challenging in these poems. Before I do that, let me quickly go back to my thesis, which later became this book. And the way I do teaching YAM and the process of my teaching and the writing workshops that I do. When I got to the course, I could not find Xhosa literature books that explored themes of pleasure, same-sex relationships, erotica as a standalone genre in isiXhosa. Even a compilation of essays on sex for pleasure where partners are focused on satisfying each other, not le nto ibizwa ngamanyala, or objectification of women, or seen as a taboo. Ndithetha ngalaa nto imnandi abantu abathandanayo bayenza nayo. Ingelonyala, ingeyomfihlo. Initially, my aim was not to identify or close a gap in isiXhosa literature. I just wanted to read and write poetry regularly and not rely on inspiration. To exercise my writing muscle into a healthier habit of writing, even if I did not feel like. Get my reward, which is a degree, and everyone is happy. Ubuyinja ngokudalwa, ngokuvela nokuzalwa, akonanga unakele, lo nyaniso ibonakele. I write, kwizinja zonke zalelali kukho le ngumamise. Umamise lintshontsho yimbewu kaToki. UToki yinkunzi yenja yalapha ekhaya. UToki ulala evundwini, umamise phandle yinja. This is not a translation, but we are here. So of all the dogs of this village, there is this one called Mamise. Mamise is a small dog, germinating from the seeds of this homestead. Mamise is Toki's seed. Utoki is our homestead's male dog. Toki impregnated all the female dogs in this area. Toki dumps, scatters his seeds, and keep moving. Moves on to another fertile soil. He has an orchestra of puppies spreading throughout this village. Toki sleeps in the fireplace inside the house. Umami say, outside you, dog. I thought that it is important to mention that when I was doing this synopsis to isiNgesi, I usually translate from isiNgesi to isiXhosa, but now I was translating my own work to isiNgesi. Now here I had to make deliberate choices for each word I was using. Example ngesiXhosa, xa ndithi uToki liqhawe eliqhwalelayo, which could have easily been directly translated to isiNgesi as a wounded hero. But kwisiXhosa, Toki is not a hero. You know, but I had then to apply an idiomatic expression of iqhawe eliqhwalelayo as an insult to Toki's social standing in the writer's eye. I then replaced the wounded hero with a limping hero, using limping not as a known adjective of walking with difficulty, but trying to retain the idiomatic expression of his humiliated social standing in the society, or at least in the speaker's eye. This poem in the thesis is a response to Mqhayi's Mbambushe and the general worshipping of male dogs in the patriarchal society. A male dog is elevated to a higher standing and honored more than a female dog. Secondly, even in our daily lives, of the colloquial phrase inja yam is commonly referred to a respected male character that has a positive influence in the community, or who is feared because of his financial standing or whatever power they might seem to possess. While the term injakazi, female dog, is used to degrade a woman who chooses to date when and how they pleases. In these selected lines, I highlight how uToki is glorified for his skewed ways and how Umamise is mistreated because of her gender. Umamise is Toki's seed and now has to occupy a motherly role to a mass choir of Toki's puppies, or abantwana, children, if we were to personify the idiomatic metaphor. And lastly, there's another poem, quickly, because I wanted to be practical about how I think the other ways of decolonizing, as utishal. I'll just read one line and then explain, and I'm done. I'm left with a minute, but that's fine. It says, "Itswele umboniso wokuqala kungecawe mna nomlingane sixonxa isidlo sasemini. Umlingane leliphi inxeba engakutyinela lona. Mna linye linzulu lalekelelene." In English it says, "It's a Sunday. My partner and I are making lunch. Partner, which wound would you wish I could heal in you? Me, there's only one. It's deep, it's layered. Partner, what caused it? It's Sunday occasions of peeling onions. Which occasions are those? Me, I can count them. We're 12 years old. My friend Manono and I, once we turn our backs from the congregation, we head towards the gate holding hands. When we get to our street, we kiss. Our street is clothed with a scent of a fried onion. 2, in the church choir, we are banned from singing with other kids. Not until we are purified, we are smelling of peeled raw onions. At home, before Sunday lunch, in the kitchen, mother is chopping an onion. She disdains Umanono. Umanono is feeding me obscenity. Every Sunday, an onion deflates her maternal intuition. And what is it about the onion is that when you fry it, it's nice and everyone wants to taste. But then if it's raw and it's closer, it's the layers that we're raised with, then it smells off and no one wants to be associated with that smell. Enkosi kakhulu.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tunzikazi. And whilst you're thinking about the engagement that we're going to have now with your questions, that should not be preceded by a long introduction or your own keynote address. I see Noble laughs there because we used to be very careful as to how we brief panelists, and respondents. But we never get it right. And I want to start off by connecting the three, and then, of course, you can then respond, all three of you, to each other's questions as well, whilst we wait for the audience and the online people to come together. Tepo, this second layer of the painful inner voyage, I would like to connect to Mtunzikazi's ideal or idea of trying to choose anew who and how she would like to be in the world, and link that, of course, through your interest in the oeuvre of Ngugi and her interest in excavating through isiXhosa language, that connection between the role of language and the practice of language within the context of the decolonization project. And then, Norma, of course, whether if the colonial presence is so omnipotent, how can language play a role in that excavation that you're talking about, that can move in the direction of an Africanism so deeply rooted within ourselves that we have a better position to critique from? Okay, so, and that's the, Tepo, you can start, then Norma, then Tunzikazi, and then, of course, please feel free to engage each other's presentations in whatever way you would like, okay?
No, thank you. Yeah, I feel very much honored to share the platform with these two comrades. Deeply honored, and I'm learning a lot. No, I mean, language is central to what we're talking about. The decoloniality framework came to us post-2016. Of course, it was there before, decolonization. But decoloniality post-2016 comes to us via Latin America. From people who don't speak English, first language, who are Latin, and then bring this thing to us in English. We then take it from them in that translated word, and all of us are not also English speakers. Do you understand what is going on here? People from Latin America who are not English speakers bring this thing to us in English. We are not English speakers. We imbibe this thing and we translate it into English. What is going on here? Right? So, of course, Ngugi tells us that, you can't do Africanization without going back to our language. right? You know, what are we talking about when we talk about decolonization without using your language? So that's why, you know, this kind of work is very, very important. You know, the books, you know, the children's books that, you know, Nomalanga has written, you know, that we use at home. You know, very, very important. So language is at the center of this. Language is at the center of reimagining ourselves, right? And I like this way of going back and critiquing the fathers of our literature, Umqai, for example, or Mufono, you know, in my side of the world. That we go back to them and we fight with them. Forget about the white man. Let's have our internal fight with our forefathers. So that's why in my work, you know, in my PhD and in my forthcoming book, I start with Plaki, Mphahlele, and Biko, and I fight with them. I'm not interested in, you know, what the white man did. I'm interested in our limitation. So Plaki, you did this, but, you know, so Plaki, of course, Setswana literature and Setswana language at the center of his discourse. But what were your limitation? Mphahlele, what were your limitation? Let's fight amongst ourselves, right? That's how we escape the gaze. We say amongst ourselves, our fathers, our mothers, right? You know, as I said in my work, I work with Plaki, Mphahlele, Biko, and sometimes Mbeki. What were your limitations in imagining a new constitutionalization of society? I'm a lawyer, I work with the constitution, of course, right? So that's a way to do it. So I really like this work of, you know, going beyond decolonization by going back to our language, centralizing our language, having fights amongst ourselves, family fights, family fights, right? Family fights is how we build the family. But if you are always looking out the window shouting at that house, yeah, you colonized us, and now you don't want to. Do you see that you're imposing Western epistemology in the house? There's incest, there's homophobia, there's patriarchy, there's limitations, but you're looking that way. So really, I aligned myself fully with what, you know, Osinomalanga was saying. I aligned myself with, you know, this kind of way of doing things. And poetry is very, very important because poetry does not dictate, does not tell you the line of march. There's a line of march. Poetry forces you to question your reality. But most importantly, poetry is important because it forces you to think about tomorrow. What is your tomorrow? Not what is the critique today. What is your tomorrow? So really, yeah, I really aligned myself and really, and Osinomalanga is quite correct. Decoloniality has become very masculinist. Not become, it has always been post-2016. So you're quite right that the students were disruptive, but of course in the students, there were mistakes within the students. Very masculinist, very patriarchal, very heterosexual. Can they be very heterosexual? Yes, very heterosexual, right? Post the students' discourse. So I like that distinction between what the students did and what we did as lecturers, when we took up this discourse, right? Where we assimilated it, domesticated it. But I'm saying even within the students, there were mistakes that were made here.
I mean, let me just see if I can continue the conversation with Seppo quickly. I mean, I think, so yes, so we have to have the fight with each other. And I know you're also implying, because you're saying there has to be a broader conversation with the world. And I think that's important, that if you can have a sensible fight that's meant to improve within, it strengthens you to then be able to talk to the world. And I think that's been difficult for Africa at large. I think the post-colonial problem is that. isn't it? That we were able, we are transition children, right? We are, I grew up partly in Zimbabwe. Eh? Hey, yeah, we are clear because I'm about to ask you am I allowed to be an African aunt? Because I will get to that because I wanted to put to both of you that in this fight, we have to accept that we are born into the fight, and then we grow up in the fight, and then we hand the fight over, and then we advise on the fight. I want to talk about that. The way you spoke about your father, and I'm seeing the circle between the Methodist preacher and now the closer critique of Umkhai in you. Because that circle is inescapable. So, the students were disruptive, that's fine. But I rejected decoloniality from the beginning because I believed that it was a white liberal position. And the reason I believed it was a white liberal position is because I believed that it broke the circle of internal fight and internal progress. And I believe that the intention of all white liberalism is to stop dead all black thought by saying to it, oh, no, sorry, sit down. Oh, let me embrace you. While you worry about your wounds, let me embrace you. You worry about your wounds, come worry about your wounds with me. It's like, no, stand on your wound and take the fight on. And that was my problem with it. It's that it presented itself as going to get us out of a conundrum, but it actually posed a black fight that actually in the end was insulting your black aunt. And so it was patriarchal, but it was also incredibly democratic. So, and here it's not about students or anything, it's about the nature of the debate. So as a black woman who is a particular kind of person, and if everyone can forgive me, because I'm also tired of this as a black woman thing, I'm tired of it. But I battled with having a conversation in any space where I wasn't going to be immediately shut down, because if I say, but into abelungu man lena sayazi phuma pha the white Brazilians nina nibaleka nayo apha khasimen masilwe nalento if we're gonna open Umkhai, then masilwe nalento or ingqumbo, which is a fantastic example of exactly lento bamaxesha ngamanye ngoku amaxesha ngamanye. That's a line in there that is the most powerful line, and there's this deep embrace of the conflict that we are facing. So I think my response to you then, Andre, to your question is exactly this. Can I just be an African aunt? I wasn't born an aunt. I became an aunt. I didn't ask to be an aunt. It comes upon you in life. So there's an intergenerational conversation amongst black people that is always fraught but has to progress. And my argument with decoloniality was that it refused for the intergenerational conversation to occur, and it refused to allow the thing to progress in the form we are sort of talking, and it dropped the standard of black discourse, because now it's about your wound, which every goddamn black person has a wound. Your parents drank through their wounds, they beat you through their wounds, and you will have a wound, and not a single black person is without a wound. It is not your wound that is special. You are not special for having a wound. It's black to have a wound. Oh wait, it's human to have a wound. So now I'm even making it worse, because now it's all lives matter. But anyway, but we're talking black on black here, ne? So in the end, coloniality is not perpetual and pervasive, because I am a black aunt, and I'm prepared to fight with a generation that is coming after me, because guess what? It's their job to fight with the next one. You won't escape it. And if there's no black vanguard that is prepared to take the shots, and say, no, isisilungu ento, and then you fight me, and then I'm moving, because I have to move. I have to say, okay, fine. Okay, fine. I think I understand. But then the conversation must be in good faith. But I don't think the conversation was in good faith, partly because academics were like, our next paycheck is here. And then they drove this thing. And the students were then running to wherever the academics were driving this thing. Then funding came. And then you, the black aunt, who's like, Sislungu lento, it's like, you are, like, the toxicity of black women, the toxicity of black women academics. And it's like, oh, really? Guess what? You're the next. So it's that break in the intergenerational fight which bothered me, I think.
So yeah, no, I agree with Utsepo and Ngumala, but Kala now Utsepo, but the thing is, for me, like we throw these terms, you know, someone who went to see Gamba, JSSS, all these terms, decolonization and this and that, but where is the practicality, you know? How practical and how deliberate are we about those, you know? So we need to have these conversations. And every time when we're having this conversation, unfortunately, we're having them in front of the white gaze, you know? So then you start asking yourself, how is this helping us, you know? And we know the structures. That's why I went to Methodist, you know, because you, as a child, you don't have a choice. You know, you grow up on and so you have to go to church. You know, it's a course debate. We didn't have to say, how do you feel today? Do you feel like going to church? You know, so you grow up there. So you start with that and you realize that this thing, we are in a conveyor belt. You know, so we move from church, then we go to school because you're supposed to go to school. Then you move to school, then you go to library. You go to library, you get to those books. These books, ngabefundisi omqhayi yayingabefundisi ogqobha yayingabafundisi bonke yayingabafundisi. So when did we take a break? So when do we sit? But it starts with you to say, what is the understanding of decolonization, you know? So that's why I don't go around throwing all these other words that I don't even know, you know, linguicide, link this, and I don't even know what these things mean. So for me, practicality is very important, you know?
Thank you so much. Before I ask Jenny just to check for online comments, and then I will come to the house here. This is such a fantastic engagement that we have here now, but I suspect that all three of you would agree, and Omalanga, you did put it forward, Tsepo, you yourself, and Tuzikazi, you as well, that no doubt that the 2015 protest, student protest, framed and signified in particular way around the question of free, decolonized higher education, was certainly a watershed moment for reimagining the higher education system and, of course, for rethinking the place and space of students and bringing the question of knowledge, justice, and freedom and democracy back into that discussion. So from your vantage point, what would you think, and you can frame that in the style of the critical in any case, because it has a praxis to it, what are the big gains that we can excavate from that movement that we can then project into our future, our current and our future work, you know, because there is something there. There are particular forms of, you know, hiccups and bumps and, you know, detours that have happened within that space. But it certainly is a moment for our sector. And of course, as you can imagine, it also became a particular kind of moment for the global higher education system as well. What is it that we can take from that productively as to thinking as we move ahead? Tsepo?
Yeah, what we should really take from that were two things. One, it quickly became, you know, the idea of alienation. These protests are about the fact that students feel alienated from Western universities. Now, of course, if you feel alienated, then ways must be found to assimilate you. That was a mistake. We quickly were focused on the idea of alienation. We quickly focused on number two, the idea that in our curriculum, you don't have Madlingozi, Mkize in the curriculum. Therefore, the idea is to include 2 articles by Mkize, 2 articles by Madlingozi. Then everything is sharp. That was a mistake. So we should move away from that. What we should take away are 2 things. One, the idea of dialectical conscientization. For the first time, those of us who have been teaching for a long time got the idea that students have got a voice. students have got a knowledge, students have got a background, and they can teach you as a lecturer, right? So for the first time, students said, no, actually you are wrong. This is not how sociology is in my society. This is not history. Normally, what you've been teaching is not history. That's not what my grandmother taught me, right? So we need to hold on to that. The idea that students don't come to the classroom with empty knowledge, but that they are not empty vessels, but that they come with their sociology, with their history, with their legality, in my case. We need to hold on to that. That was a very important thing. By the way, that's also what caused the problem of expulsion and so forth. It was so disruptive, it was so scary that people were expelled. Not because of breaking classes, but that they disrupted this master-student relationship. So that was a watershed moment. Oh, students can also teach me. Of course, I had Tabos leadership in for 15 years now, so I knew this for my Tabos leadership in. So that was important. That was very, very important. The idea that students don't come to university as empty vessels, but that they can teach you as a lecturer. We need to hold on to that. What is the history that students are bringing in before the history class that Nomalaga teaches in the first year? What is that history? What is that sociology? What is that legality? Can we hold on to that? What can we do about that? It was so frightening, I'm saying, that was the cause of expulsions, not the breaking of windows and so forth. That was what was frightening, and we need to hold on to that. The second thing that we need to hold on to is, the idea that university education is a public good. It's a public good. Of course, those of us who are from certain background, we know that education is not only a source of mobility and out of poverty, but that education should be free. If I qualify, it should be free. So the idea that education is a social good, that was very radical. Of course, there were strikes before for fees and so forth. But for the first time, people saying, no, education is a human right. It's not there in the Constitution. The Constitution talks about wishy-washy access to the education. No. Progressive realization, wishy-washy stuff. So this reinterpretation and, if you want, decolonization of the Constitution to say education is the idea that kids must be educated by society, and they mustn't pay for this. I don't think we have understood how radical that notion is, right? And for me, that was very, very important. But I'm saying, I want to talk about the negatives, the idea of alienation, the idea that we are excluded from the curriculum. Those were the mistakes that we did, that we centralized or we emphasized the demands to be that. Students are alienated because of a statue that is here. Remove the statue. Students are alienated, change the logo. A very cute logo, by the way. But no, that's not enough, right? Or the curriculum, right? But no. Both Nomanang and I are not dissing the 2015-2016 protests. We're not doing that. But we are saying it was captured. And let's acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Please go.
Yeah, no, the work that was done with the students, I'm old, is very important, but we must also be aware and wary of just add and steer kind of thing, But we must know what is it that we're doing. And I like what you are saying, that when you come, I always say to students, when you're joining our course of creative writing, you are a writer already. So you come here to have a conversation with existing writers. So you have your own voice, just you are here to make sure that you exercise and flex that muscle. But also then it's going to be very difficult that if you're going to bring all of those other things, from outside just for branding purposes, you bring your grandmother's work and ideas and wisdoms so that you can add it with a Eurocentric way of doing things. Then we are not decolonizing in that way, You have to look at what is there and all we've been taught in this the missionary. We know the history. We know the history of Uncwadi or literature Xhosa, it came with the missionaries, We need Lovedale and the Bible and stuff. We need to read all of those things and break them down and say, where do we find ourselves and where are we demystifying all the myths that we've been told? So for me, that's the way of decolonizing. That's a practical way of decolonizing.
I think Tsepo's framework is good, and I just think that whole concept of the moving beyond the focus of the alienation needs to really be thought about. So I think maybe what needs to happen is it's the aftermath that needs to be focused on. And the reason is because life doesn't stop. Life is happening. The thing is, it's very awkward now, Andre, to have to talk about decolonization as it was really given its animated, most radical voice by students. So you can't talk about it without talking about the student protest. I don't want to talk about the student protest only because they say you appropriate their story. They make those accusations. So I don't want to talk about it. I just have to refer to it because I have no choice, because it's what gave this actual disruptiveness that was necessary. So I think let's talk about the aftermath then. I think I'm not a child, right? Unfortunately, I wish I still was. I wish I could, I wish I could emphasize to any young black person that life doesn't stop and start with your youth, right? The reason being, we could predict that after Fees Must Fall would be a grave collapse of mental health. We could predict it. Why? Because we grew up watching our uncles who fought in the struggle also suffer that. We could predict, you could have told them, anyone could have told them, any black person who cares about black kids could have told them. Because we watched it all our lives. We watched black people break down because of struggle all our lives. But if you dare to say such a thing, ageist or whatever the new language is. So my problem then is that let's look at the aftermath. Let's test that then. Let's ask why the alienation was the focus. Let's hold on to what happened, what went wrong, what academics, and by academics it could be anybody, what the universities did to appropriate the moment, and then build a black tradition of intellectualism, continue that off that, so that we can actually save black lives. So I think that it was, if anything, what we should hold on to is the ability to reflect on it and be honest about it. Because my fear, and again, can I be a black aunt? I didn't ask to be an aunt. I became an aunt by virtue of my age. There's nothing I can do about it. Suddenly, I am responsible for, I didn't realize this, for saying to a younger person, you're gonna burn. Yes. And then their job is to say, just hang on a minute, I have to just try and burn something. I'm gonna say, you're gonna burn. But if we can't have that trust of that conversation, then it's difficult. So I think the aftermath, what was predictable to anyone who had lived a black life should be key to reflecting on it. Because I think then we are able to progress the black discussion, because in the end, here's why we need to reflect on the South Africanism of this that annoyed me. The rest of Africa was like, hey man, guys, we've got big problems, but get fine. If you want to decolonize, Tina, we've been at it for 60 years and it's a shit of a thing, this thing. We're struggling up. Hi, South Africans, hey, decolonize. The rest of us was like, oh God, I'm a South African. Okay, fine. So let's just listen to the last born of the continent make its demands. So everyone had to accommodate the South African moment. Aku-collapse emazweni. We should be training engineers. We should be figuring out how is higher education gonna train for a future Zimbabwe. We should be asking South Africa. No, what we did, we went and fetched Zimbabwean postdocs, sabenza decolonization. And then the Zimbabwean postdoc was like, yo, I get fine, sure. Meanwhile, what is this young black person here going to do with that thing that they need to go back and fix a country at some point when it's viable? So the rest of the continent was like, okay, fine, buy again, just accommodate because my literally, the rest of, and then every now and again, which annoys me, those based in the West, the African diaspora based in the West, was like, ooh, okay, Black Lives Matter up, how can we appropriate, so they then export the South African debate overseas and embrace it there. No, guys, no. Africa is collapsing. Let's reflect on why South Africans became obsessed with this thing, why they feel their alienation, then let's move on.
Also, as someone who's in the arts, there's a thing that I've seen that I think we need to take in a traditional way of, you bring all of these elements of things from home, let's say you are doing an exhibition or a visual exhibition. So what do you do after that? How do you step out of the character, Because you bring all of these things and all of these rituals and you're practicing here, and 95% of people who are here are white people, and you do all of these other things, you slaughter a chicken on stage and all of these other things, and then you call all of these energies, and then you get your distinction, and then you are done, and then what happens after that? So that's why I think maybe that's why we are sick also. We need to look at that, How do we preach? How do we give but not give too much and off ourselves, for a white case? Yeah, Bo?
Thank you so much, Jenny. Jenny will read the questions from the other platform, and then I will take it before three panelists respond. I will then take three more from the audience as well, Jenny. Okay?
Sure. Sounds good. So everyone on the floor, prepare your questions. So I've got two from Esther Romani from YouTube that I think are related. The first one is, surely the creolizing identity must apply equally to both black and white cultures? And then the other one is, how can one prevent interculturality from becoming a non-critical concept or notion of humanism? And then the other one is from Giovanni Poggi. He's talking about xenophobic violence happening in the Coca municipality. Locals are burning down Basotho migrant shacks and threatening lynching unless they leave. And he asks, decolonize, Pan-Africanism, how can these concepts find their way into communities that need them the most, instead of just over-intellectualizing them to end the scourge of African xenophobia? So that's from the chat for now.
Thank you so much, Jenny. You have captured the ones that you would like to respond to now. So can I? Right. I'm going to take three questions. No introduction. No what do you call it? Prefaces. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. 1, 2, 3 in the same row, actually.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I had many questions, but I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll be brief.
Yeah, please, Lakina.
Yes. But it's just interesting what I actually had, to a point where I think I don't know my name anymore, But the question that I would ask, I think it will go to Tsepo and Nomalanga in particular. And I think the part about Africa is collapsing. But I just want to ask Tsepo and Nomalanga that the institutions that we have, across Africa, the economy, everything, including the legal system in particular at Tsepo, when they collapse, Nomalanga in particular, can't we say maybe that now it is actually the colonial institutions that are collapsing, therefore maybe we should be celebrating their collapse in Africa in that sense? And now, Tsepo, if we hang on, to these institutions, like the way that the legal system actually currently operates in South Africa, and we know that it comes from maybe the West, how can we decolonize, when we are hanging on to all these things that were actually created on? What can we do? Where do we draw the line in there? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucky. And Lucky, congratulations on your PhD, eh? So.
Yeah. Thank you. I have more of a question and a comment after the question. Just to the panelists, shouldn't we perhaps speak to decolonization in terms of two aspects? Number one, are we talking about issues of decolonization with regards to connecting us to our cultural backgrounds as Africans, or as opposed to talking about decolonization in terms of the term itself, in our terms of interaction to maybe other races? So I think there's always a confusion, because one minute we're talking about our cultural orientation being something we are fighting for in terms of decolonization or trying to be recognized for, as opposed to the oppression that comes with, the colonial aspect. So I always feel like we get in a mix of not getting clarity with that. So because one time we're talking about our cultural aspects and A, B, C, D, and then another time we're not engaging what it is to be colonized, what was oppressed, and how do we get out of that. And since Nomalanga, I'm very much Zimbabwean, very much into decolonization. The three of us here, all of us here are very much Zimbabwean. But also I just wanted to just say on the comment of Africa, I think we must get into engagements with the rest of Africa to see the position, because Ubudi quoted Ngugi Wationgo. He's an African. Most of the literature, when you look at even, what's the name, the famous, I'm forgetting him. Nigeria, Chimamanda, all the motivation, all the interesting books, they come from most African people who have termed decolonization and tried to transcend it into maybe educational aspects and reading and literature. So how do we also integrate what the rest of Africa has done? I don't think the rest of Africa have ignored it. They've integrated it in different ways, which maybe we can think around integrating for South Africa and the rest of Africa. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tanaka. Okay. Right, please continue.
Dubelang. My name is Karabo. I'm a student of philosophy and a teacher here at Nelson Mandela. So I think the first question has to do with something Usistoma said.
Okay, can I just check how many questions you have? Two, okay, right, that's okay.
Just two questions. The first one has to do with something that Usistoma said, that as former Follists, I was in second year, I think, in 2015, third year in 2016. And fortunately, unfortunately, I'm a lecturer now. And one of the things that we felt was challenging in what we were fighting is that there was a clear separation between staff members, which were lecturers and administrators, and students. And that's what created the separation, especially in an institution like UP that is mostly white. So the black cohort is very small, so it was very difficult. But I find as a lecturer now that I'm unable to connect with the student outside of the classroom. And I feel like if there's another struggle, there's going to be that disjuncture again. How do we then create a situation where the art of education transcends the classroom? That's the first question. The second question has to do with something Abu Tsepo said about accepting that there's some positives that come from the project of colonization itself and the elements. Let me be clear. You said something along the lines of, let's accept certain modern things that came from the West, with exception to the notion of liberalism specifically. And this bothers me because our constitution is grounded on Western liberal notions. It clearly states it in the preamble. But within the academic project, we engage on subject matters from a normative framework of Ubuntu. There seems to be a moral disjuncture there. And the constitution is supposed to be the guiding principle of every citizen of South Africa. How do we then bridge that gap between what we seem to be engaging in within the academic project and what seems to be the guiding principle outside in society? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Who would like to go first? No, we're going to take them in another round. This is the fight in the family, okay?
The first question was about creolization. I don't know the Sotho word. I wish I could use a Sotho word. Creolization is not enough. But creolization, not creolity or not creole, creolization, a never-ending process. Not a form, but a process. Creolization. It's not the same as hybridity. You know, hybridity is a notion that you are adding. You've got two things that you add together, hybridity. But creolization is, and I'm also answering the last question at the same time. We are not afraid of globalization. We are not anti-universalism. We've been universal from the beginning. That's why when you go to, Mapungupe, or if you go somewhere else, you see that there's been trade with the Chinese and the whatever from long time ago, even before colonization. So we're not anti-globalization. We're not anti-universalism. It's about the terms of engagement. How do we engage with the world from ourselves? So that's why I'm against delinking. It's a mistake to delink. I'm writing a biography, intellectual biography of S.K. Mphahlele. And S.K. Mphahlele has got a nice line where he says, I'm one up against the white man because I know his stuff, but I also myself. I'm one up. Guys, that's not being assimilated. That's being one up. So white people must also creolize. No, you pose it. So you I'm pointing at you, Jenny, because you asked the question. You represent the question that was asked. Yeah, so yes, to be human is to be intercultural. And therefore white people must also be, Mphahlele also says white people live on Africa, but not in Africa. They live on Africa, but not in Africa. What would it mean for white people to live in Africa? J.M. Coetzee says, white people are no longer European, but not yet African. Listen to that. No longer European, but not yet African. They are liminal species. To get out this liminal species or state is to embrace creolization. Yeah. So it applies to everyone. I'm not saying that there are positive things from colonization. No. I'm saying before colonization, we took from the West. Look at this shirt of mine. Look at my Basotho blanket. You know where my Basotho blanket comes from? You know where the beads come from that we use, that we claim are our thing? Do you know what this shirt that Professor Kid is wearing, that he calls African come from? That's at the superficial level. At a profound level, what happened in the Cape, in the encounter? People who call themselves Afrikaner, they're not purely white. They are mixed people. People who call themselves, whatever, you can hear the clicks in their language that is not pure. In our culture, there was no pure culture. There was no boundaries. We are moving in and out of boundaries. That's why some people are called Tsepo Madlingos. Some people are called Naledi. That's why I irritate. I only call it Naledi. Right? In this place called South Africa, no one is pure. No one is pure. No one is pure. Right? So that's the point. So no. The idea is not to say there were things that came with colonization that were good. Decolonization means we reject things from the West that dehumanize us, number one. Number two, decolonization means we reclaim things that the West claim to be of the West. Mathematics, astrology. We know they don't come from the West, but the West claim it to be theirs. That's what it means. And number 3, it means, even a guy who's as radical as, who's that guy from the ANC Youth League? Who said the ANC Youth League? The African nationalists. No, I'm not African national, not ANC Youth League. No. How can say Mr. ANC Youth League? No, amongst the guys who said ANC Youth League, Mandela, Sisulu, and who? Lembede. The most radical Lembede. The most radical is Lembede, right? African nationalist. He's got a phrase. The point is not to be assimilated, but it's to assimilate. The point is not to be borrowed, is to borrow. That's how you win in the world. So let's be very clear about this. The Constitution, yes, the Constitution is Eurocentric, is modernist. Of course, my friend Tembega will disagree. It's our ongoing fight, me and him. A constitution must be a mirror of society. That's what the constitution should be. A mirror of society. So when you look at the constitution, you must see yourself to reflect the morals of the public. We don't see ourselves in this constitution. Right? For us, every society has got a constitution because you must constitute a society. And for us, it's Ubuntu. So yes, Ubuntu as a form of constituting society, but also a means and end towards a good society. That's what we must be going for. And this constitution is problematic from that perspective. There was a question about collapsing. And Dade Ramosa, I don't know if you know Ramose, Bokhobe Ramose. I've got a video that I made with him and Bovatura de Suya Santos, 2 very good elders. You can see it on YouTube, Ramose and de Suya Santos. And when Ramose talks about Zimbabwe, he says, yeah, let Zimbabwe economy fall because the Zimbabwean economy is Rhodesian. And after the Rhodesian economy will come Zimbabwean. I don't know about that. I come from a mining affected community. And mining affected communities, there's a lot of suffering after the collapse of the mines, after the collapse of everything. And the idea that we should not talk about the collapse, because the collapse is good, it will lead to the collapse of neo-colonial South Africa. No. In my town, there is a lot of social ills because of collapse. So the challenge is the following. How do we exit neo-colonialism? You see, that term is very nice, neo-colonialism. No longer colonial, but not post-colonial either, neo-colonial. And the collapse is here. And we need solutions to the collapse now. In South Africa, 1 in 3 children go to bed hungry. 51% of the population is beyond the poverty line. There's no water, there's no electricity, there's collapse. We can't say, good, let it collapse, as some politicians say, let it collapse because after that there will be nirvana. No. So I'm a social justice person, and social justice is a liberal project, of course. But my concern is the following. How do I ensure that these people are not evicted from their houses? How do I ensure that these people get water? And I'm using this liberal constitution. How do I ensure that these people get water? How do I ensure these people... Now, it's a game. Of course it's a game. How do you play that game? Now, my radical friends, academics, have got the luxury to say, No, Tshepo, you are under false consciousness. You using the constitution to stop eviction, you are propping up neo-coloniality or colonialization. I don't have that luxury. My idea is, how do I get this mother not to be evicted? How do I get these people to get water? And I know all the critiques of the constitution. So using the constitution tactically, not strategically, that's a challenge. That's a challenge for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sepa.
After? Oh. I think you've covered the terrain, because I think that romanticization of collapse is nonsensical. There's no such thing as a collapse that ever treated a black person well. Just try. If you're feeling treated well, just know your mother's the one who's working in that collapse to feed you. There's no such thing in black life. There's no romantic black life, I'm sorry to say. But in terms of our ideals, it means we must then think, you see. You see, so Tanaka, in fact, you are part of settler colony, and this is the problem all of us in SADC face. So we've all got this desire to engage this problem. We are literally, I mean, you know, I know colonization happened to everyone, but let's be clear, settler colonialism was its own psychological torture of a certain kind, right? You have to live with that thing all the time. So, I mean, I just don't want to hear my Nigerian friends telling me about South Africa. Hey, man, you don't understand this settler colonialism. You wake up every day, it's here in front of you, these people are here, you go to school with them, they're everywhere, they torture you in your head. So, you know, it's its own thing. That's why we are obsessed with the question, much more than we should be. Whereas all of us are lying, because much as we are like, hey, Paul Kagame, what's he doing? But we are like, damn, that work is done there. Hey. So I think, let's stop lying. Let's stop lying, okay? Let's stop lying. I grew up in Zimbabwe for part of my childhood, where we would get milk in the classroom. It even had trivia on it. Yeah, I grew up in that Zimbabwe. So I dream at night of that Zimbabwe, but I now know that that Zimbabwe is going to take all of the SADC generations, including Dudula. Like Dudula, whether you like it or not, I'm sorry, you're going to have to apply your mind then. So I would prefer that. I would prefer that we apply our minds to that conundrum that Tsepo faces. You think Tsepo doesn't know that the constitution is liberal? He's the first one to tell you. He's the one critiquing the roots of the constitution. But when he's faced with a hungry black person here, he has to think. That's because black life is filled with dilemma. And it's filled with contradiction. And that's, for me, the alienation plus the practicalities of our lives. And I don't understand how we got to a point where these things were not going to be questions. I just don't understand. If we genuinely care about all black people or people of African descent of all varieties, our questions, and then, by the way, sorry, just to then, why also we have a problem. The moment it's the resourcing, and then it's a bit structural again. We find resourcing in policy. Oh, let's all go and see how to help women and water. And then we get there and it's running around in circles. So the decolonial debate is not the only one that's running us around in circles. And so I think what upset me from the beginning, and which is why I was told to come here, because I'm upset with this thing, is that it has distracted a bunch of us in our best years from asking the hard questions that confront us at all levels, the layers that we have to confront, the dilemmas and contradictions to resolve. And I think in some sense South Africa is still, I find it sad that South Africa, which currently has a moment of resourcing, can't devote itself to the African question in a very purposeful way. We must devote ourselves to it because time is running out. Time is literally running out for South Africa. There's nothing special about the South African situation in that sense. So why do we lie about it? Let's not lie about it. Let's say we have to solve a SADC problem. We have to solve a question of what's happening in Great Lakes. We have to solve these problems. So That's where I'm coming from. And I think we will then be able to, instead of celebrating the collapse, what I'd rather do is convince the university to fund you or fund me to be able to sit like a person is funded at MIT to solve a problem.
There was a question about where decolonization and cultural practices. I think yeah. I think for me, if you're talking about decolonization as a way of fighting oppression, then it's freeing the mind, you know. Because for us, for example, as black people, water is a very important thing, you know. So you go to water to practice different things, you know, just to be one with yourself and your maker. So now, if you cannot, now it depends on how much money and close proximity to whiteness and wealth you can go to the sea. You know, in the morning, if you are from the rural areas there and you can't access it, you know. So for me, all the oppression is both in it's physical, it's emotional. And that is why I feel like we are so sick and so stuck. It's because we don't have access to these things. So if we're decolonizing, we forget that we're like, oh, we're decolonizing only in these institutions, you know. And you must have a certain diploma or undergrad for you to access these institutions. But when they go to do their research, they go to those people. But when they come back, they don't bring them here. You know, so for me, so decolonization starts with all this thing. We need to be aware as a researcher when you go there, you know, and you get that information from those mothers about the music and everything that they are doing and their practices and their rituals and stuff. But you then don't allow them, you don't have a conversation with them later. You know, they are just, you go and mine, you know, go and mine. So how are you different then from this thing that we are fighting, which is oppression and colonization? Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. And then I'm going to take your hand, the three over here, okay? And then we will close it up. Thank you so much.
So there's just one more question from the comment section on YouTube, and it's, how do we not give too much of ourselves for the white gaze? Oh, sorry, I'll go again. How do we not give too much of ourselves for the white gaze?
One, two. Okay. Don't worry, Prof. Kate. No, two things. One is a comment and one is a question. I think there's a small gap. There's a small gap in the conversation. This particular one, right? Krishet, please take note. There should be just particularly this conversation, just a person, a young person, probably a student, the conversation would have been complete, right? Particularly this point conversation. Of course, you brought progressives, Prof. Nomalanga, Pratsepo, you know them, right? Progressives, just that voice, yeah, the conversation would have been complete. That's that comment. Two, I want to ask Pratsepo, which one is primary? In the sense that we amongst ourselves have a conversation, as you said, a family conversation, right, as black people, right? Case in point, in the context of the decolonial project and the framework, we know how it came about, right? That in Newswork it came about during the Fees Must Fall protest, right? So the decolonial project, the Fees Must Fall. So which one is primary? Because during that framework, the decolonial project, Fees Must Fall, we had our counterparts, right? Females, obviously, as much as you say that fees must fall, we must decolonize, but ni matcha nathi niyas abuser. Right? So which one do we tackle first? Right? So which one do we tackle first? Si tackle shanjani, and kube kuko as the questions and comments on the side that, you know what, as much as we want fees must fall, we must decolonize and what's not, but according to us, we cannot wage this fight of decolonization, of fees must fall, and march with you, Nina, as well as we know that Nyasabiuza, Nyas torment and what's not. So, which one then becomes primary in the quest of not derailing the fight and what's not? So, within the family fight, right? So, that's it. Thank you.
I remember the keynote at the BLA event, so please keep it short.
Okay, thanks, Prof. No introductions. Okay, quickly, my name is Ubongani Momoti. I've got a comment more than anything else. The comment is to not be very far from what Mr. Mnotoza had said, that I've identified a gap within the speeches, the deliverance of the key speakers here. And I think what has been said here is that we are massaging the manifestations, the outcomes of the real problem. We are speaking about the dehumanizing effects of colonization, how black people cope with it every day, poverty, identity crisis, the heritage, robbery, to name a few. But I think we're missing the point here, and even when we're attempting to even speak about decolonization, even in the space of an institution of higher learning, we fail to understand that colonization itself was a system, that it came to progress, to bring about a capitalist system of organizing society, such that in a cultural spectrum, colonization were dispossessed of land, where we practiced our processes, our cultural practices. Our forefathers were then dispossessed with a systematic agenda, a capitalist one, which then today, in fact back then it was primitive. Today it has matured. In fact, we record to say that South Africa is experiencing levels of the highest form of inequality, which is a manifest of this crisis, which is capitalism, and which education finds itself as a pillar of capitalism, because it is the same students who then are going to be skilled and trained and then go sell their labor in the labor market. So when you speak about decolonization, which I too, with Prof. Mkhize, I resonate with you, because Prof. Lwazi Lushaka had said that there was no specific demarcated framework of which decolonization would go about. So it is left on interpretation, who then feels best that decolonization must be this or that, which then becomes problematic. So I think if we had more time, I would elaborate. I'm sorry to leave it like this. But I think up until we agitate the current status quo, the way of organizing society, in which it then brings about these social ills in a cultural perspective, in a social perspective. You speak about how women are being alienated, oppressed in the workplace, at home, how the queer community itself and the LGBTQI community, in fact, I would elaborate, but because of time, thank you.
Please keep it short, colleagues. We have reached the end of our...
Okay, I'll be very short. Yeah, thank you, Pratsepa, for touching on the concept of, being pragmatic. I think prior to when we were coming here, we had a very heated debate in the car. And the debate primarily was on that concept of being really pragmatic. So in current affairs, there's a whole debate around, how can I say it, title deeds, or rather allocating title deeds to people who stay in the township, right? And the debate that we were having was that, yes, it might be well-meaning, but doesn't granting of a title deed to a person who stays in a township, understanding the context that the construct of a township is an apartheid construct that dehumanizes people and that, you know, inhibits growth, progression of people, doesn't that then legitimize, not to say that it isn't, you know, black people shouldn't own land particularly, but doesn't the granting of title deeds, or just mere title deeds, legitimize the construct of apartheid and does not progress us any further beyond a desired objective? Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, unfortunately. Okay. Who would like to go first? Yeah. Okay.
I think you can sum it up as the visitors, but I think let me deal with this issue of the economy and of students and challenge this idea that students bring knowledge. I'm going to challenge it, yeah. Let me just be difficult for a moment. I want to challenge this thing of the student who brings knowledge into the university as a co-creator of knowledge. Disrupt it as follows. First of all, the university is an artificial environment. It's not an environment that is intended for, how can I put it? Let's put it like this. It's an artificial environment, right? So it's created by whoever the peoples were ancient times, and they were not European necessarily. It was created for the student who comes in to be disrupted based on the knowledge they brought with them from society. It's actually the other way around. The trouble we have with the colonial university is it was such an aberration in the form of what we call human knowledge, which is open and expansive, because it's actually quite a closed environment, that it became an aberration to how human beings learn. But in truth, if you're going to go to Timbuktu, a university as a Timbuktu, figure pa, I'm bringing knowledge. I'm sorry, Islamic scholar would have said, why? Because there's a cultural continuity. There's an openness to that knowledge system that affirms your humanity when you come in. You trust that system. The reason why the colonial university needs to be disrupted and we have to affirm your knowledge is because it's the aberration, not you. So this is why now we have a problem when the student walks in and thinks they know something, and then you try to disrupt them, then they report you. They report you for making them uncomfortable. They report you for making them deal with the fact that there may be something wrong, perhaps, with their assumptions. So no, the university is not here to affirm you. It is here to disrupt you, but we have a disruptive university system in the sense that it arrived as a colonial project. So no, actually. So I wanted to say this because to take it for granted, to make this assumption that in fact you do know is part of the problem that we face now. We're dealing with high levels of plagiarism. We're dealing with, I'm just putting a grievance out there for those of us who are marking. Hey, wait. Allow me, DVC. I wish Foxcroft was here. Allow me, DVC. Allow me to argue that the trouble is the cultural continuity that is disrupted in black life. Because awunofika ebuhlanti uzenze mdala, awunofika ebuhlanti uzenze mdala, and nanso ke ingxaki esijongene nayo kwale esisingisi esingayazi ba ebuhlanti sizofunda ntoni. So I wanted to say that let's sit alongside these uncomfortable realities. That in fact, yes, we need Tepos Shibin. What a fantastic concept. Because the student does bring everything to the table. And then you arrive, ati la makhulu ongu Professor Mfene. Hey mtanam, hayi kaloku khala. Professor Mfene. But guess what? Guess who can't do that anymore? Ni woke and ni offended. so asakwazi ukunifundisa. As a result, Africa is about to experience even greater collapse because we can't even expect you to hold up a higher standard than your knowledge. The project of the African University, as it ought to have been, the ideal we have is that you must become better than your predecessors by virtue of standing and learning on them and having the family fight that takes umbambushe further, not a narcissistic conception by you know more than abantu abadala now, you do not, actually. And I am being ageist. I go, look, it's an internal grievance. Oh, how do you want to do it? Yeah, you go. Yeah.
Do you want to stop?
Yes.
No, the townships must collapse. Of course, giving title deed moves us away from the question of land dispossession. It's a scam. It's a scam, of course. So I'm not saying every practical ameliorative solution must be taken. No, some of them are made to affirm white hegemony and settler colonization forever. Not colonialism, but colonization forever. So no, I'm not saying every practical solution is good. No. Some of them are actually dangerous. The township is a barracks of laborers, and we can't celebrate it. People say township economy, how do we revive township economy? That doesn't make sense, right? So no, I'm with you. No, I agree with both comrades. We need a young person here to compliment, but of course not as a token, to also add to what we are saying. The white gaze, how do we move away from the white gaze? We need to make ourselves illegible and unhearable, right? Unhearable, illegible from the white men or from white people, right? And that's what 2015 was about. 2015, these students were so disruptive that they could not be captured. Right? They were so radical that they will remind you of, the first wave of black consciousness, where Biko and his friends said, we have nothing to demand from the apartheid government. We have nothing to demand because we won't recognize it. We have nothing to demand. So people later on said, no, these guys were too intellectual. They were not practical because they were concerned about how do we elevate our own consciousness. But it was right, and PAC, of course. PAC said, we don't claim anything from the white men. When we are getting arrested, we don't even plead. Right? We don't even plead because we don't recognize this court. That was Bugwe's, thing in court, and somebody else also said the same thing, and yeah, he became more famous. Right? So, yeah, no. You move away from the white gaze by making yourself illegible. But just know that at a certain point you have to engage with the world. Just know that. Just know. So it's a transitionary measure to remember yourself. To remember yourself. It's a transitionary measure. That's why, the last book that I mentioned from Ngugi is Global Dialectics. Dialectically with the world. But you can only be engaged dialectically with the world when you have remembered yourself. So it's a transitionary measure. I'm not concerned about the white gaze. I'm concerned about the family fights. I'm concerned about the foundation of our world. But later on, you must engage with the world. There's no building of the black world. There's no black world. There's no native world that you are building. It's a transitionary way to become. So yeah, what comes first, or was it you? I can't remember who was saying. What comes first? What comes first is to remember yourself, is to decolonize yourself, is to be the best that you can be. And it's not a label, it's not Marxist, it's not feminist. Nah, I mean, forget about labels. Forget about labels. It's about how do you become the best that you can be to engage with the world from a firm foundation. Not playing games of shouting at the white man so they can acknowledge you. I mean, that's a game. That's a game. Yeah, so what comes to that, it's a case-by-case scenario, but ultimately I want to question against the idea of delinking forever. You can't delink forever. You can't, that's coward. That's coward, even, you know? I mean, that's why when students see that Frans Fanon had a white woman, they want to kill themselves. That Bigo had white girl, they want to die. Louis Gordon, Lopez and Go. Let me leave it there, Prof. Thank you. On that controversial note.
No, that's fine. I'm good. You've said everything. I know. No, I think I'm left with a lot of questions, and it's a continuing debate, but it does not end now. And the important thing is that your lineage or where you come from, you always bring it with. But also, what are you doing this for? You know, we must always be clear on that. You know, are we doing it so that you are saying all of these important buzzwords because you want to be the most clever person in the room, or because for me it's practicality, you know, it's the small things, you know. But if we all put together in this big box or in this big bag, then it will make a difference, you know. So for me it's language. So for me it's starting from where it came from, like it's the missionaries, you know, and it's us, and then it's queering isiXhosa, for example. So how do you do that, you know? And who are you doing it for? Or are you living it, or are you just doing it because, you know, it's the buzzword, it's the topical thing now to do, you know? Or it's a cute thing to do, huh?
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Can you give like a massive round of applause? Now, I have seldom been in an event where the contributors and the people engaging in the different discussion stay so close to what the abstract has promised to do. So this is how we advertise it. This means, this is now against the circularity of the decolonial discourse. This means, in the context of higher education, engaging with modes of political organizing, black identity formation, new liberalism, queerness, black modernity, African cosmopolitanism, matriarchy, parochialism, and some African histories, amongst others. You have done all of those, so give yourselves a great round of applause. And these are not going to be easy debates, colleagues, as you well know, and thank you so much for the young people and, of course, the emerging academics attending here, and some of the other colleagues as well. Absolutely fantastic, but it's the right time. It is the right time for us to reflect on a particular moment, the trajectories that have followed from it, its aftermath, and what it means for a deep, deep African project to emerge out of those particular kinds of debates and discussions. And we are extremely grateful as a research chair. Thanks for that advice as well. We take it to heart. We are extremely grateful for this discussion, and of course for the three panelists that have shared with us their thoughts. Okay, thank you so much. Let me hand over to Jenny.
Okay, I'm not going to fight with anyone today. I'm just here to basically ask Fortunate Jwacha to come up and do the final vote of thanks. But before she does that, because she can't thank herself, I'd just like to thank her so much for organizing the event for us. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Fortunate Jwacha, and it is my pleasure today to give a short vote of thanks on behalf of the Chair for Critical Studies in Higher Education Transformation, known as CRISHET. A huge thanks to our speakers today, Prof. Tepo Majingozi, Prof. Nomalanga Mkize, and Mtunzigazi Mbungwana for today's conversation and insights around the scholarship on decolonization. To Prof. Andre Kiet for facilitating and contributing to the conversation. Thank you, and in his role as Chair of CRISHET and DVC Engagement and Transformation for holding the space for this kind of conversation to take place. Thank you. Thank you to the CRISHET team for spearheading the organization of this event and working tirelessly to ensure its success. Thank you very much to Dr. Jenny Dupree for her work on coordinating the event, and to Vimbiso Okafor for the administrative and logistics work. Thanks to Hashali, Tangelani, and Apiwe, who also assisted in setting up today and also other coordinating aspects of the event. Thanks also to Ponto Mabena from the Nelson Mandela University Media Services for assisting with the live stream, and to Village Media for assisting with the audio aspects of today's event. We'd also like to thank Jonathan van der Walt for the venue and setup, and for his continued support of our programmatic work. Finally, thank you to all who have joined us for today's conversation. We appreciate the support and the intellectual engagement. We hope that we'll see you again soon. And for those who are attending in person, please note that refreshments are being served outside. Thank you.